Clemson and Georgia are two teams that have both risen to the top of college football, and they do deserve a ton of respect. But when I'm looking at this matchup in Atlanta, I'm having a very hard time figuring out how Clemson is going to score enough points to win this game. Yes, I get Cade Klubnik is back at quarterback, and Garrett Riley hopefully makes the necessary adjustments from a play calling standpoint, especially in the red zone. But until Clemson has the type of skill players they used to have around the quarterback, especially at wideout, this offense is not going to be prolific, especially against teams like Georgia. Clemson fans are excited about their talented young wide receivers, and they should be, but I wouldn't get my hopes up that an opener against Georgia is the best game to burst onto the scene and flip the narrative. Georgia does have to replace some players, but they reload, they don't rebuild. They'll replace NFL players with NFL players. But another big worry of mine is the interior of this Clemson offensive line. You got to replace Will Putnam, and I know Matt Luke is a hell of a coach. And while Georgia isn't expected to have their most dominant front seven that we've seen in the last couple of years, you can bet your bottom dollar they're still going to be pretty damn good. Now, I do think Clemson's defense will once again be very stout, but eventually the dam is going to break against this Georgia offense led by Heisman hopeful Carson Beck. It could feel like somewhat of a close game. Then we look up in the third quarter and it's 24-6 Georgia. Clemson isn't a bad football team. They could win the ACC, and I think Moffa and Klubnik will be fine down the road. But this game just feels like when Saban's Bama's teams would play a non-conference opener versus a big name and dominate. The Dogs are pissed off about the way last year ended, and Kirby doesn't have to manufacture any adversity for this team. So give me Georgia, and don't be surprised if it's by a good amount as well. And before I get to my other hosts here, we're going to live stream the LSU-USC game on Sunday, so make sure you're subscribed and you're locked in, our first live stream of the year. It's going to be a great time, but David Cone, former Michigan quarterback, a team that Bama played in the non-conference one time.
Yes, I did.
My brother, the birthday boy, Blaine Crane. And look, David, I don't want to come out here and make it sound like I think Clemson's going 7-5, but when I do look at this matchup and a Georgia team that defensively may not be as elite as they have been in the past, it may really be an offensive team that has a really good defense, I just don't see Clemson being able to put the drives together, even when they get in the red zone. If they're having success moving the ball in between the 20s, I think it's going to be tough for them to punch it in, man. I just think Georgia's a lot better than they are on that side of the ball.
What a fantastic opener for Clemson. This is everything that you want. I mean, 12 straight seasons of double-digit wins snapped last year. That streak ended last year. And honestly, the disrespect that Dabo Swinney gets around the country is fascinating to me. He just gets a lot of disrespect. It reminds me a lot of Jim Harbaugh. This guy just goes about his business and people make fun of him and all this and that. I know Georgia's really, really good. I have him predicted to win the national championship. I know this Clemson team doesn't look like the ones that won 2 national championships for Dabo. That's why this is such a great opener for them, to be able to come out at the beginning of the season and set the tone. Now, I mean, I don't want to live in a college football world that the best that Dabo Swinney-led Clemson teams can hope for is to like barely lose to Georgia. Oh, that's the best you can do, is if you can even cover the spread against Georgia. I mean, go out there and compete. This is going to be the 3rd year we get to see Cade Klubnik. So he's going to be a true junior, 2nd year under the same offensive coordinator. Go out there and punch Georgia in the face. Now, there's multiple different ways to win a football game. Here's a stat line that I think you would need to see, or at least see something similar if Clemson's going to be able to pull off an upset, because I don't think the line is crazy. 2 touchdowns right now, that doesn't seem crazy to me. I mean, I think most people around the country agree, like, you have an uphill battle ahead of you. Here's a stat line I think we need to see, and I pulled this from some of Clemson's wins and losses last year, as well as some of Georgia's losses, even though we don't have a great sample size, mostly from the Alabama game and the SEC championship. First off, Clemson rushed for over 140 yards and allow fewer than 100 yards rushing against Georgia. Have 0 turnovers, but even more than that, at least be +1 in the turnover differential.
Just win it.
Just win the turnover differential. I think that'll be a lot easier if you can get home on Carson Beck. I think you're going to need to see at least 2+ sacks on Carson Beck, but win the turnover battle one way or another, right? Win 3rd down efficiency. A lot easier to do if you can stay out of 3rd and long. And in the SEC championship a year ago, Alabama actually lost 3rd down efficiency to Georgia. So you don't need to necessarily win 3rd downs, but Alabama's a lot different team than Clemson is. I think Clemson needs to have a better 3rd down efficiency than Georgia. And then in the red zone, you got to find a way to score touchdowns and not kick field goals. Maybe not 100% of the time. Maybe if you get in there 5 times, you score 4 touchdowns and kick 1 field goal, but you need to be going for touchdowns and not field goals. That's the sort of recipe that you're going to have if you want to upset Georgia in the Aflac kickoff game.
Yeah, and a couple things. And I'm not saying I don't think if Clemson comes out and plays really well and Georgia just plays okay that Clemson can't win. I'm just trying to figure out how Clemson's going to establish any balance on offense. We know that Shipley's gone, but Maffa's a really good back, right? We know how talented he is. We understand what Garrett Riley wants to do. He talked about the zone read option game, Blaine, and how Cade's got to make better decisions. But in order to not only score in the red zone, but move the ball down the field, you're going to have to pitch backwards on early downs. You're going to have to be able to run play action. You're going to have to trust Cade, even if you're moving him in sprint outs and boots and things like that, to be able to get you in 2nd and 4 and not just line up and run power. I'm just trying to figure out a way that Clemson can get out of 3rd and 7, because I feel like Cade's the type guy that the turnovers aren't just, oh, we turned the ball over. It's a catastrophic turnover. It's a scoop and score. It's I fumbled at the 4 going in. And it wasn't just against Duke last year, and I put some of that on Garrett Riley. But regardless of how much better Cade Klubnik is, I know the young wide receivers are talented that Clemson has, and they're excited, but they're young. And this Georgia team playing this game in Atlanta is not the best place to start if you want to show off some new cars that you're pulling out of the garage.
Well, I think after all this is going to come down to is up front. Can Clemson hang with Georgia up front? New defensive line really for Georgia, not huge names like we're used to seeing. And Clemson's offensive line last year was mediocre at best. It doesn't matter. I don't think Clemson's going to run for 140-plus yards on Georgia unless Cade Klubnik uses his feet. Cade Klubnik is going to have to use his feet to beat a team like Georgia. It's going to be hard to beat Georgia north and south. Hell, it's hard to beat them east and west, but you're going to have to run them. The depth is good, but not great at Georgia. Clemson doesn't have the skill players to beat them out wide. I don't see how Clemson is not walking into a buzzsaw in this game. You have an NFL offensive line for Georgia. You bring Etienne's little brother at running back. You lost Brock Bowers, but here's Oscar Delp. You have Lovett at receiver. Your defense is young. You have the best safety in college football. Cade Klubnik hasn't proved it. This offensive line hasn't proven it. We rag on Dabo Swinney because he doesn't go to the transfer portal, and you see that in the skill positions. So at this point, I don't know what you can look at for Clemson and say this is what they have to do to win the game. There's not a position they're better at than Georgia.
Well, I think you're gonna have to score on special teams. I think Clemson's gonna have to find a way to do that. Whether it's a trick play, they may run tight end delay down in the red zone. The problem to me with Cade running it, Cade isn't a great runner.
But he's not bad.
Like, he's not bad.
He's Peyton Thorne.
I think Peyton Thorne's a much better runner than Cade Klubnik. I think he's a lot faster. Cade's not really fast. Cade just has the threat that he will pull it if he has to and you give it to him. I don't see him running away from Georgia. But, David, is it something where if you're Clemson, you're Garrett Riley, you say, you know what, we're going to test out the waters early with the run game, going against some of the replacements that Georgia has on defense. Don't fall for the trap of thinking that Georgia replacing people on defense is like pretty much everybody else replacing people on defense. Similar to Clemson. I trust Clemson to be able to replace guys on the defensive front 7, just like I trust Georgia to be able to do it. But is it something, David, where maybe it's like, all right, the run game isn't working the way we want. We are getting caught in 3rd and long. Hey, let's go some empty. Let's go some spread and use the quick game, some now screens, some bubbles, right? Getting in cluster, running our cluster check plays to the outside to maybe use that as an extension of the run game to find a way to get in second.
Sure, I just don't think that's going to be good enough. At some point, this kid's going to have to push the ball down the field. They're going to have to do it, like you said, pitching backwards at time where Georgia's not expecting it. They're going to have to be accurate doing that, completing balls, and then also be effective in the run game. They're going to have everything working to beat this team. All I want to see, though, regardless of if Clemson loses by 3 touchdowns or if they lose by a point or if they win the game, whatever, I just want to see Clemson go out and do everything possible to win the game. What I don't want to see is them be so conservative, right, that they're thinking, okay, this is a non-ACC matchup the first week of the season. Georgia's really, really good. Let's just be conservative, not get guys hurt. Let's don't put Cade Klubnik in too many situations where he can get injured for the entire season, and we can still win the ACC and get an automatic bid. That's going to be one of those scenarios where this 12-team playoff hurts the regular season, waters down an opener. I want to see Clemson do everything possible to win the football game, regardless of what that means, dropping back, throwing the ball, pitching backwards, whatever. And if you go lose by 3 touchdowns, I think it's just going to say more about Georgia and how good they are. One more point here on the Florida State game a year ago for Clemson, which was at Clemson. They did rush for 146, only gave up 20, and that was against that front 4 last year that we were seeing at Florida State. Half of them play in the NFL right now. Only gave up 22 rushing yards against Florida State, and were better on 3rd downs. But they lost the turnover battle. Again, that's where you need every single one of those bullet points if you're going to beat a team that is as talented at every position or more talented than you are.
Yeah, it just feels like Clemson has to play so unbelievably well and so unbelievably clean and hope that Georgia makes a couple of mistakes. And that's really never the boat that you want to be in. And again, nobody's saying Clemson is a bad team. No. Please do not misconstrue this. It's out of the respect that I have for Georgia. Even looking back last year when Clemson played Duke early in the year, I am concerned about if Clemson does find themselves inside the 10-yard line and that field shrinks, right? And Georgia can do things in the back end because they're not worried about getting beat deep down the field. Is Garrett Riley going to go back to that zone read run scheme? I think that would be disastrous. I think Clemson has got to get away from that inside the 10-yard line. I know Garrett had Max Duggan and like these guys in the past that can really do it. Cade Klubnik running with the ball and making the decision to pull it or pop it. Guys, go back to last year. He kept the ball on a true run play on 4th down by himself. Just did it on a whim. Ends up getting hit, doesn't score. They lose the game. I am worried about Clemson getting down there, and then when they get down there, if they're going to do anything but be able to kick field goals. Oh, and by the way, they have a true freshman kicker that they just named their starting kicker going in this game. So you're playing in Atlanta against a Georgia team that lost in Atlanta last year to Alabama to keep their ass out of the playoff. Kirby doesn't have to dance around and talk about how nobody respects him. Any of that stuff this year, that's already built in. I'm with Blaine here, David, and I hope it's a good game. I may take Georgia minus 13.5. I know we're going to get to those bets early just because I think it's going to be a game where we're like, all right, it feels kind of slow. Georgia's been methodical moving the ball down. It feels close, but then all of a sudden halfway through the third quarter, you're like, it's 27-6. Like, how did this happen? I think Georgia wins this one.
If you're Clemson, you need something to go good early.
Yeah.
Do you think you see a trick play early if you're Clemson and Dabo Swinney? Is that something you pull out? Because, look, it's an avalanche, man.
Well, the worst.
It's an avalanche when it hits you. All right, one, can you get to Carson Beck? You have good defensive line, but they're young. Peter Woods, probably your best defensive line other than Barrett Carter. He's young. Can you even pressure this man? Look at they have an NFL offensive line.
Yeah.
Basically, they're the Ravens walking into Atlanta in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. You're going to have to make this man uncomfortable. Because with the pieces he lost, I know, but the replacements aren't as good, but are pretty damn good. All right, he just signed with a jet airliner. This man has got everything he needs. Can you pressure him? Oregon couldn't. Last year, he sat back there and basically wrote a book the whole day.
Well, just like the Florida State game, and David, you know this better than anybody playing the quarterback position. If you're Clemson, I think the worst time to run a trick play is like the first game of the year. Like it's because everybody on defense, I promise you, I've been in those fall camps, we are literally screaming, watch for the trick play. It's the best time to run it the whole year in offense's mind, which is the worst time because defenses are always thinking that. But when you look at Clemson's offense, what I think you really want is a little bit of what happened to Florida State and Georgia Tech early in that game is that the script goes really, really good. We're on schedule. We're on script. The problem becomes when the script goes away.
Oh, yeah.
And then you have to start playing the game, and that's what we saw the other night.
That's why you should just script the whole game.
Yeah, just script the whole game.
You need to look like Florida State did on their first drive for 4 quarters.
Yeah.
Because when I start to hear things like trick play early, and even if it works, now all of a sudden I think you're going to lose 48-7.
For sure.
Okay, because
now
that's all
I know
you got.
You know.
That's all you got.
Yeah, I know
I need Clemson to walk in here and be like, you know what? Y'all aren't that much better than us. Okay, we've done what y'all have done. We got 2 national championships too. Granted, not the same players, but still, like walk in and be like, we're a big deal too. Yeah. All right, we can beat y'all. Y'all aren't that much better than us, and just let the chips fall where they may, man.
It's going to be interesting. We want to know what you think. The line's going to open up 2:45 p.m. Central, 1-855-236-3228.
All right, Chad, hit that like, hit that subscribe button if you donate. It's on topic.
On
it
topic.
Will get read. We're going to start the day off with Will Sheely. What's up, Will? He says, Clemson has a new kicker like you brought up. How big of a part will special teams play in this game?
It's going to be massive because special teams is really just Spanish for field position. So field position is going to dictate a lot of outcomes. Obviously, when you get a chance to score, get 3 points, when you get a chance to, I always like, if you can kick the ball out of the back of the end zone in a dome, kick it out of the back of the end zone in a dome 100% of the time. Nobody's ever returned a touchdown on a touchback. But what I'm interested to see is how aggressive are both of these teams coming after punts? How aggressive are these teams in the return game, in kickoff return? I've seen a lot of teams with advantages say, you know what, we're not even going to risk fumbling a kickoff and giving it to this team we think's inferior. We're just going to fair catch now that we can sit here and wave our hands, even if it's at the 15 and we get the ball where the normal touchback is. It's going to be massive, not just for the points, but for field position. Because if you're Georgia, making Clemson march 80 yards against this defense is obviously a much taller task than giving them the ball at midfield. So it's always going to be massive. And look, there's some freshman kickers that come on the scene and they're badasses, man. Like it's not like you're going there playing left tackle, right? I'm not saying it's easy, but from a physical standpoint, you are going and hitting the ball. You can recreate that action over and over and over again, as opposed to having to guard one of these defensive ends or block one of these defensive ends who can pass rush. You can get a bull rush. You can get a swim move. They can stunt. They can slant. That snap's going to go to that holder. That holder's going to put it down. So I'm looking at the punt teams more than anything because I do think both these teams will be able to make field goals, even though that's something that Clemson struggled with.
Well, and to me, special teams starts on third down. That's what I'm interested to see is how do they approach third down, which will then impact special teams. Because I have no doubt if Georgia finds themselves in a 3rd and 9, they're going to let Carson Beck rip a dig over the middle to try and get a first down. I'm interested to see will Clemson do the same thing, or are they going to just run a draw, run a screen, hoping maybe you can break a tackle and pick that up, but really we're just trying to get
punt and play defense,
so we can punt and play defense. Hope for a low-scoring game because that's our best chance against Georgia. I don't think Georgia's going to play like that.
That's not playing to win if you're Clemson. Like
no.
you can't, Clemson, you can't lay up in this.
And it's fine.
No, you can't lay up.
See, it's fun. It's well, and I like the laying up strategy because it's well enough to say, well, the point is to shoot a low score in golf, and sometimes that's not going in the water, and sometimes it's better to just make par and lay up. I understand that you can play like that and still have a strategy to win the football game. I just don't think it's going to work out.
Well, it's all circumstantial. This is for every game. I mean, if we're sitting here and we're halfway through the second quarter and Clemson's down 14-0 and they've got the ball and there's a 4th and 2 from midfield, I mean, at some point, you got to nut up and go for this thing. Like, you got to try and get yourself back in the game. I'm just wondering if, hey, maybe early we come out and it's different than what we think. Maybe Clemson can hang with Georgia on the line of scrimmage consistently over and over again, and we get halfway through the second quarter, and it's 10-10 or 10-7. Then if it's 4th and 2 at midfield, go ahead and punt the ball if the defense is working. So a lot of this is going to be the feeling out process early in the game to understand, hey, because like if I'm Florida State after that first drive against Georgia Tech, if I'm the OC, I'm looking at other guys like, hey, first 4th down and short we get, we're running this right through their teeth because I don't give a damn because they can't stop it. That was a lot different feeling than when you got to the third quarter in that game and you felt like, man, Georgia Tech is just the better team.
I'm glad we're on the same page. That's exactly what I was
You've got to feel it out. You got to read the
mentality Georgia Tech had.
Hey, YouTube, we're 1,000 away from 150K subs. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. We really appreciate it. I think we're going to get there before kickoff, but I don't want to assume.